Robert, you're on, Mr. Smalls.
Good evening, everyone. How's everybody tonight? I am Robert Smalls, currently Congressman Robert Smalls. Everybody wants to know about the planner. No one wants to know why I stole the planner, but everybody wants to know how I took the planner. Well, my story starts back when I was born. My mother gave birth to me in a one-room slave dwelling shack in Beaufort, South Carolina. She gave birth to me by herself, no one else. But the story even starts back farther than that. At the age of 7, my mother was taken from her family, and she was bought by John McKean, a wealthy plantation owner in Beaufort. One day, his wife came, they handed out clothes and food at Christmas to the slaves. And my mother was so engaging that she just ran up to Mrs. McKean, and she wasn't afraid. So John's wife thought that she had something to her. So she took her from her family, and she took her back to the plantation. And she became a house girl. She cleaned the house. She learned how to do laundry, so forth and so on, and cook. And she was at Mrs. McKean's beck and call. My mother never seen her family much after that, and it hurt her very bad. So she always talked about that. Moving on, my mother's owner died, and his son took over everything, the two plantations, including myself and my mother. His name is Henry McKean. Henry treated me pretty good. I was at Henry's side all the time. Wherever we went, I was at side him on the wagon. I cleaned his boots, fed the chickens, all menial stuff, but no hard labor, because he always kept me at his side. As I got older, I didn't know my place as a young slave, and that worried my mother very much so. She thought sure something was going to happen to me because I would stay out past 9 o'clock, the slaves' curfew, and I would stay out and play with the rest of the little white children. And I would get arrested, and I would be sent to jail. And Henry, my owner, he would always come bail me out and take me home, but he never put the lash to me. He never disciplined me in any way. He just said, Robert, you're not like everybody else. You're going to have to learn your place in society. Well, that didn't sink in. So my mother took me to a slave auction to see slaves being sold and see families separated, so forth and so on. The slave auctions, before there was a law passed that slaves had to be sold inside, slave auctions were held outside, and the public could see slaves jump on the slave block, get prodded and touched and turned around and mouth checked and whatever else you can think of, imagine, men and women and children. She took me to see that. Then she took me over to the jail. That's where slave owners would take their slaves to get beat or disciplined. And she would take me over there to see that. Well, that put a bad taste in my mouth, watching slaves get beat, watching children ripped away from their mother's arms, fathers weeping, husbands watching their wives dragged off, wives watching their husbands dragged off, kids ripped out of loving arms. So that stirred something in my soul, and I rebelled. And my mother really, really feared for my life. So at the age of 15, they sent me away. My mother asked if my father would, Henry would send me to Beaufort for work. My mother never told me who my father was. I never knew who my father was. Some speculated that it was my father, that Henry was my father, because I am a mulatto. I am black, half black. And because he never disciplined me and had me always by his side, some speculate that my owner was my father. After all, my father and my mother are about the same age, and they grew up together in the plantation. So it very well could be, but I don't know. He agreed, and he sent me to Charleston. There, for a few years, I was a lamplighter. I worked in a very prestigious hotel as a waiter and dishwasher. I was a stevedore. And I would look out onto the docks and I would see the ships coming and going. And there was a kind of a beckoning that the sea was calling. So finally I asked my owner, Henry, if I could find work elsewhere. And a slave could do that back then in Charleston. Of course, he had to give all his earnings to his master except for $1. So he said yes. So I went to the docks and I started working on the docks as a laborer. And I going off and on the ships. I just liked the way ships felt. So I got hired on as a crew member onto the planter. Now the planter is only 2 years old. It's state of the art. It's made from the region's live oaks. It's a steamer. It has wheels, one on each side, and they're oscillating, so you can turn the ship. And it drafts very well. It can draft in less than 4 feet of water. So it was state of the art. Well, I started as a wheelman after about 19. I started as a wheelman on the planter. And we would ferry goods around the harbor. So in that way, I learned the shoals. I learned the reefs, the tides, the currents. I even learned the mines, where the Confederacy had planted mines in case the Union ever tried to run into Charleston and take it over. Because the planter was commandeered by the Confederacy. We had 2 guns mounted on fore and aft in case we ever needed them. But mostly we just transported troops and guns and ammunition to the 4 forts in the region. So that was daily, every day. And as I said, I was the wheelman. I couldn't be called a pilot or a captain because slaves just couldn't be called that. So I got pretty good at it. But I was beckoning and I was scared the whole time because I met and married a beautiful woman, Hannah. Hannah had already had a child. Hannah was able to give me one also. And we named her Lydia after my mother. She was my darling. Later, Robert Jr. came in. We call him Beauregard. Later, Robert Jr. came in to the picture, but sadly, Robert Jr. didn't make it to 2 years old. He passed away young. My wife, and we always talked about freedom for our children. Not much for ourselves, but for our children. It was always a discussion at the dinner table. Of course, we couldn't talk about it in public. That was separation. Right away, mother sold, children sold, I'm sold. Because you definitely want to talk about that in real life. You don't know what you're outside your house in real life. You don't want people to hear those things. One day, I was on the ship, and one of the other slaves were playing around, and the captain's hat was left in the wheelhouse. Captain Yarroway and first mate Pritchett, and the first hand was off the boat. So we were playing around as we were doing our work, and captain's hat was put on my head by one of the slaves. And the first thing he said was, he busted out laughing. He said, "You look like the captain." Well, that right there gave me the plan of how I was going to take my family to freedom. I was going to impersonate the captain when the time was right. I went home, talked to my wife, Hannah, about it, and she said, "What will happen to you if you're caught?" I said, "I shall be shot." She put her head down, and she said, "Robert, where you go, I go. Where you die, I die." That's all I needed to hear. I knew that I was going to steal the planter and hopefully sail my family to freedom. Well, days have gone by, months passed, and the time had come. They were going to put Charleston on a lockdown because there was talk of the Navy running into the harbor and gunning Charleston, the Union Navy. So everybody was on curfew and the city was going to be on lockdown. That was the perfect time. So that night in May, I decided we were going to go. Now, before this, I had talked to the other slaves and they agreed that they were going to go along. But there was one particular gentleman named Davy Jones. Now, Davy, once he got liquor in him, he was known to talk. And we had to get at him. Had to threaten to kill him if he didn't set himself right, because he was getting about ready to get us all killed. That passed, he settled down. So we all agreed that this night was the night. Now, the wives are allowed to come and see us because we're not allowed to leave the boat. We have to stay on the boat all the time. Most time that we're allowed to get off the boat is when there's nothing going critical, or when the captain and the first mate, Pritchett, and the first hand are on the boat, and holidays. So the wives and the kids, they come to see us, but they have to be back before curfew. So they came to see us that particular night that we were going to steal the boat. And did you ever hear chickens cackling when there's a fox around the hen house? But when I told those ladies what was going to happen, you should have heard that. You never heard so much cackling going on in your life. It took me an hour to get them women calmed down. Finally got them calmed down. Told them what the plan was, that we're going to take them and the kids, take them up the PD River, up to the the Ottawa. And I was going to pick them up there. Got them off the boat, got them up to the Ottawa with the help of another slave, and everything was set in motion. Now, the other reason why we picked this night, the captain, first mate, and the engineer are not supposed to leave the deck or leave it. One of them is supposed to stay on the boat at all time with the slaves. Well, this particular night, or that morning, they said that they were going into town, and with the lockdown of the harbor tomorrow, everybody was going to be inside, and with the curfew. So First Mate Hancock decided at the last minute he was going to stay and stay on the boat instead of going in town with his wife, like Pritchard and Captain Yarway. Everybody, slaves came to me and said, what are we going to do? I told them, I said, well, First Mate Hancock's either going to go out with us, locked in the stateroom, bound and gagged, or he's going to be thrown overboard as a corpse, taking this boat tonight. Right at the last minute, Hancock decided to go in town with his wife, and there he saved his bacon. There had to be a whole lot of faith, luck, and whatever else you had to say or call the events that had to happen for me to get that boat out of the harbor that night. Just when we thought everything was fine, we had stoked up the engine. That steamer belches, the old planter, she belches and throws sparks in the air and so forth and so on, and smoke, and oh, she's a mess when she gets started. The wind usually blows out of Charleston out into the harbor. That night, the wind changed, and the smoke. Now she's wood fired, not coal. She's wood fired, and the smoke started to blow into Charleston. Now, only a few months before that, 6 months, Charleston experienced one of its worst fires ever, and everybody was on edge. And we were paranoid that somebody was going to come and look to see where the smoke was coming. Nobody did. Later on that night, a sentry came over and looked down at us. And even a police detective walked by and his patrol and looked down at us. We just kept doing our work like we were doing. That's about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Because we're already always ready to go and at first light, wherever we're going. So as the sun was coming, as the dawn grew nearer, I told him to throw the lines. We're going to throw the lines and we're heading out. I'm going to go up the PD River, that's north of us, and pick up the families. Now, the families consist of women and children and 8 slaves. The first thing somebody should have realized was the planter was going north. The planter never goes north. It either goes out and goes south down to the forts. As we sailed up the road, we sailed up slow. Nobody said anything. Got up to the ironwork, water in smooth. Got the deck planks out. Got the women and children on board. Got them stowed away down in the stateroom. Back down in the river we went. Still, nobody said anything because we were leaving a little earlier than what we should. No warnings. Good test. Second test. Came to the first fort. I gave the correct signals because I know the signals to get past all the forts also. Got the signal to head on. The batteries were manned on the banks. The lookouts were there. And we just crept down. I told Alfred Gardine, my engineer, I just said, take it slow. I said, no reason to go fast. Just move on out like we always do. Got to the second fort. Same thing. Gave the proper signal. Everything was fine. Third fort was off to our left and out farther. Gave the proper signal. Got by that one. Everything's going good. Now it's coming to the beast, Fort Sumter. Now what the Confederates did was they bought a log buoy, chain buoy logs, stretch it across the harbor right to almost underneath Fort Sumter. That way, if anybody, any Confederate, any Union rammers were trying to run, they would have to come in range of Fort Sumter and those mighty guns. We're getting closer. I give the right signal. And I hear, kill a Yankee or bring one back. I said, aye, aye. And kept steaming out. Just at that time, Captain Yerway was coming down to the boat dock. And he noticed the planter was gone. Now, he had plenty enough time to signal all the forts to get to the Fort Sumter up the line to blow us out of the water. But for some reason, he knew what happened, but he kept quiet. He didn't say anything. Actually, he paid the price kind of and kind of not. Hancock and Pritchard fared worse than he did when it was all said and done after what the Confederacy did to them. We're steaming on out. All right, Gordine, give me a little more. Old planter starts belching, smoke's flying. Not too fast now, because now we're headed into that arc of 13 Union gunboats out there at the mouth of the harbor. It's still dark. The mist is flowing in and out. The planter just makes a whole bunch of noise. This is a steamer. It's not a sail. It's not a sailor. They didn't know what was coming at them. They might have thought it was a Union rammer. I mean, it's Confederate rammer. They didn't know what was happening. They didn't know what was coming at them. The mist would come and out and go and come and go and come. And we had put the stars and bars, the Confederacy, we had flew that flag and also South Carolina's flag up the pole before we left. And I had totally forgot about it. And just when one of the fellow slaves said to me, said, Robert, take down the flags. So we took down the flags and went down stateroom and got a bed sheet, and fixed it up real quick and ran it up the pole. So we're getting out there and the sun's just breaking. And I can hear whistles. And I see movement of the ships out in front as we're getting closer. Now, some of their steamers started going out into the ocean, but the Ironward, it didn't move. The only thing it did was come about. And we can see sailors running around on deck, back and forth as the mist would come and go. And I just slowly took her in. Could see the hatches break down and see the barrels of the cannons come out. We had already made a pact that either way, we were going to be free. If we were fired on by either the Union or by the Confederacy, we were going to hold our kids, hold hands, and we're going to jump into the ocean and kill ourselves into the bay and drown. Rather be free dead than live a slave rest of our lives and our children's lives. We're getting closer. Just then, when we thought we were about ready to die, we heard, "State your business." Captain Nichols of the Ironwork, Lieutenant Nichols of the Ironwork, had just seen our flag just in the nick of time and ceased fire. Come about. Well, we were jumping up and down, and we were happy, and the women were crying, and a couple of the slaves looked back at Fort Sumter, and I can't tell you what they did and what they said, but it wasn't good. State your business. I said, "Sir." But we were still gone. The next thing I know, as I said, "Sir," again, he said, "Halt, or I'll blow you out of the water." That got our attention. "Come around again." Brought back around. "State your business." I said, "Sir, I have some of the old Union guns." Because see, the day before, what we did was we were loading the very guns from Sumter that was damaged when the fort was first attacked by the Confederacy. And when they took it over, they refurbished those guns. And those guns were supposed to go back to Sumter that day. I said, "I have some of the old United States guns, sir." He said, "Where's the captain?" "He's back there in Charleston." "Where's the captain, boy?" "Sir, he's back in Charleston." Guns came out. "Everybody stay where you're at." They thought we were a Trojan horse. They put the planks across. They came over, went down into the stateroom, searched everything, and came back up and said, "They're the only ones on board." And Captain Nichols just looked at me and he said, "You bought this out here yourself?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You bought this out here yourself?" I said, "Yes, sir, I did." And he just looked at me. Well, through their signaling, by the time the planner got back to the Union port, everybody had known and heard the story about the planner being stolen by a slave, a 23-year-old illiterate slave who didn't even know how to write his name, spell, or do arithmetic. But he could sail a ship. As I got into the dock, we got everything settled. Everybody was there watching us come off the ship. And a voice from Admiral DuPont said, "Bring me the hero, Robert Smalls." I got myself together and I went to meet this man. He took a liking to me. He was probably one of my greatest supporters afterwards. I supplied him with everything about those forts, the ammunitions, the guns, how many men were in those forts, so forth and so on. And it was very good intelligence. And as each fort was taken, the intelligence proved to be right. And he really sent word to Washington about me and how the intelligence was right. That got us a bounty for the planner. President Lincoln gave each one of us $1,500 apiece. That's good money, especially for a slave that never had more than 50. The war dragged on. I was in 13 battles. One battle we got in was very heated. And the captain went down and hid in the coal bunker, and I took over the ship and got us out of there. Well, that made the news too, and that captain was relieved of duty officially, and I was named the captain. First black captain of the Navy. Civilian, but not ranked under the U.S. Navy. But before I was made a captain. 13 battles, unscathed. I took that $1,500, and also I had a little store that me and Hannah had, and Hannah was also doing dresses and so forth and so on, and we were saving our money up. I took that $1,500 and I hired myself a tutor so I can learn how to read and write. And I did very well at that also. Well enough that a few years later, I became one of the first black congressmen to the United States in the Capitol. You might have heard something called a public education. That was one of my first bills. Not those little one-room schoolhouses. They set up a system of public education for South Carolina that spread out through the United States. I served my time. I did 5 terms. Not all of it was good. Not all of it was bad. But nonetheless, I served my country. One night I was sitting on the porch and I heard this voice, a wretched voice. We're sitting there, and Hannah, the wife, was inside. And I heard, "Henry, I'm home, Henry. Henry, I'm home." Now, my owner, he had died in the militia years before. And since he had lost the plantations, so forth and so on, his poor wife had become destitute. And that voice was hers. And she's come running up the steps, because you see, their house I own now, it came up for taxes, and I was able to buy it. So the very house that I grew up in as a slave, and my mother, we own now. She ran right by me, right up to the steps into the master bedroom, looking for Henry. She didn't have her mind anymore. She barely recognized me. I looked at my wife and we looked at each other and said, what are we going to do? And my wife said, well, she doesn't have her right mind anymore, Robert. I said, I can see that. And she said, well, they took care of you. We can't put her out. I said, this is true. So what we did was, since she was older in age, we figured she didn't have much time. We let her stay in the house. So she thought still was hers. And we went back out and slept in the slave quarters until she passed. That's one of the greatest things I think I've accomplished, is not to hate. Because a lot of people said, Robert, why would you do that after what they've done to us? And I said, because if I do, I'm just like them. I don't want to be like them. I am Robert Smalls. The reason why I stole the planner was for my family, freedom. Thank you.